Hey guys, welcome back to another Atlas Archives exploration, where tonight we're venturing into one of Europe's most remarkably shaped countries, Croatia. Picture a nation that looks like a boomerang wrapped around its neighbour, with over 1,000 islands scattered like jewels across the Adriatic Sea. It's a place where Roman emperors built retirement palaces, where medieval kings once ruled from mountain fortresses, and where you can literally swim in the morning and ski in the afternoon, assuming you have the energy for such athletic ambitions. This evening, we'll uncover how Croatia managed to preserve its identity through 1,000 years of foreign rule, only to emerge as one of Europe's newest success stories. From ancient Illyrian tribes who probably never imagined their descendants would be in the European Union, to the stunning karst landscapes of Plitvice lakes where waterfalls seem designed by nature's most creative artist. Drop a comment letting us know what brought you to Croatian history tonight, whether it's those famous Game of Thrones filming locations, an unforgettable vacation, or simply curiosity about this fascinating crossroads between Central Europe and the Mediterranean. So, find your most comfortable position. Perhaps imagine the gentle sound of Adriatic waves against ancient stone walls, and let's begin our journey through the remarkable story of Croatia. Chapter 1: Ancient Foundations and Roman Legacy. Long before Croatia had its distinctive red and white checkerboard coat of arms, before anyone had even dreamed up the word Croatia, this land was home to the Illyrians. Picture, if you will, Bronze Age tribes living in hilltop settlements around 1000 BC, probably wondering why they hadn't invented central heating yet. The Illyrians were not a single people, but rather a collection of tribes scattered across the Western Balkans, each with their own customs, their own chiefs, and presumably their own opinions about the best way to cook fish from the pristine Adriatic waters. These early inhabitants had mastered the art of ironworking and had established trade routes that would make modern logistics companies weep with envy. They traded amber from the Baltic, crafted exquisite jewellery, and built impressive stone walls that still puzzle archaeologists today. The Illyrian tribes included the Dalmatai, who gave their name to the region we now call Dalmatia, though they probably had no idea they were providing a future coat pattern for adorable spotted dogs. The Illyrians were skilled seafarers, which makes perfect sense given that Croatia's coastline stretches for over 1,700 kilometers when you include all those gorgeous islands. They built boats that could navigate both the treacherous Adriatic storms and the calmer waters of river systems inland. Archaeological evidence suggests they had a sophisticated understanding of coastal navigation, though sadly, they never left behind a manual titled How to Sail Without Getting Completely Lost and Ending Up in North Africa. Their settlements were strategically positioned on hilltops and coastal promontories, offering both defensive advantages and commanding views of trade routes. The largest of these settlements, like Nisactium in Istria, featured impressive stone walls and complex urban planning that would have made Roman engineers nod appreciatively, assuming they had arrived yet to do any nodding. The Illyrians worshipped a pantheon of deities connected to nature, war, and the sea, because when you live in such a beautiful but sometimes harsh landscape, it makes sense to have divine insurance policies for multiple scenarios. Enter the Romans, stage right, around the 3rd century BC, carrying their famous efficiency, their road-building expertise, and their complete inability to leave well enough alone. The Roman conquest of Illyrian territories was not a single dramatic event, but rather a series of conflicts spanning several centuries, like a very long and occasionally violent soap opera, with better armour and worse special effects. The first major Roman intervention came during the Illyrian Wars, beginning in 229 BC. The Romans initially became involved because Illyrian pirates had been disrupting trade in the Adriatic, which was essentially the ancient equivalent of someone blocking the shipping lanes and demanding tribute from every cargo vessel that passed. Queen Tuta of the Ardii tribe had been particularly effective at this maritime taxation system, though the Romans failed to appreciate her entrepreneurial spirit. The Romans, being Romans, decided that the best way to solve a piracy problem was to conquer everything in sight and then build roads through it. This approach worked remarkably well for them, though it was considerably less popular with the locals. The conquest was completed in stages, with the final major resistance coming from the Delmatae tribe in the 1st century BC, who held out with the kind of stubborn determination that would later become a hallmark of Croatian national character. Once firmly established, the Romans did what they did best. They built things, magnificent, enduring, impractical things that would still be standing 2,000 years later, causing modern tourists to marvel and ancient taxpayers to probably grumble about infrastructure spending. The crown jewel of Roman construction in Croatia was undoubtedly Diocletian's palace in what is now Split, built around 300 AD for the emperor, who decided he was tired of running an empire and wanted a nice retirement home by the sea. Diocletian's palace was not just a residence but an entire fortified complex covering nearly 40,000 square meters. To put that in perspective, it was larger than many medieval towns and considerably more luxurious than most modern shopping centres, though it lacked food courts and had fewer stores selling overpriced phone accessories. The palace included residential quarters, temples, administrative buildings, and even a mausoleum for Diocletian himself, because nothing says confident retirement planning like building your own elaborate tomb. The construction involved bringing in materials from across the Mediterranean world. Marble came from Greece and Turkey, granite columns were imported from Egypt, and skilled craftsmen were gathered from every corner of the empire. The result was a masterpiece of late Roman architecture that combined military functionality with imperial grandeur, creating a structure that was simultaneously a palace, a fortress, and a statement that read, "I used to run the known world, and I have the real estate portfolio to prove it." What makes Diocletian's palace truly remarkable is not just its ancient magnificence, but the fact that it evolved into a living city. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, local populations gradually moved into the abandoned imperial complex, converting the grand halls into workshops, homes, and shops. Over the centuries, this process created one of the most unique urban environments in the world. A medieval and modern city built literally inside the walls of an ancient Roman palace. Today, you can walk through Split's old town and simultaneously be strolling through someone's living room, a bustling cafe, and the former private apartments of a Roman emperor. It is urban archaeology at its most practical and slightly confusing. Street addresses include things like Diocletian's Palace, former imperial bedroom, third arch on the left, though the postal service has probably simplified this somewhat for modern convenience. The Romans also established numerous other settlements throughout Croatia that would grow into major cities. Pula in Istria became a significant port and military base, complete with an amphitheatre that could seat 23,000 spectators. This arena, built in the 1st century AD, is one of the best preserved Roman amphitheatres in the world, and still hosts concerts today, proving that good acoustics never go out of style, even if gladiatorial combat fortunately has. Zadar, known to the Romans as Iada, became an important administrative centre with a forum, temples, and a sophisticated aqueduct system that brought fresh water from springs in the nearby hills. The Romans had an almost obsessive relationship with plumbing and water management, which was probably wise given their fondness for elaborate public baths and their complete lack of modern water treatment facilities. The Roman road network in Croatia was particularly impressive, connecting coastal cities with inland settlements and linking the region to the broader imperial transportation system. The Via Salona ran from the major city of Salona near modern Split to the inland regions, while coastal roads connected all the major ports. These roads were built to Roman standards, which meant they were engineered to last for centuries and were probably overbuilt to a degree that would make modern civil engineers either deeply envious or slightly concerned about cost overruns. Roman influence extended far beyond architecture and infrastructure into every aspect of daily life. Latin became the language of administration, law, and educated society, eventually evolving into the Romance languages of the region. Roman law provided the legal framework that would influence Croatian legal traditions for centuries to come. Roman agricultural techniques transformed farming practices, introducing new crops, improved tools, and systematic approaches to land management that increased productivity and supported larger populations. The Roman economy in Croatia was remarkably diverse and sophisticated. Coastal cities became major trading hubs, importing goods from across the Mediterranean and exporting local products like olive oil, wine, fish sauce, and stone. The quarries of Istria provided high-quality limestone that was shipped throughout the empire, used in construction projects from Rome to Constantinople. Meanwhile, inland regions specialized in agriculture, mining, and the production of goods for both local consumption and export. Roman religious practices gradually spread throughout the region, though they often blended with existing Illyrian beliefs in ways that created unique local variations. Temples were built to honor the standard Roman pantheon, but archaeological evidence suggests that many people continued to worship traditional deities alongside the new gods, creating a religious landscape that was both officially Roman and quietly syncretic. The later Roman period in Croatia saw the rise of Christianity, which would profoundly shape the region's future development. Early Christian communities established themselves in major cities, and by the 4th century AD, Christianity had become the official religion of the empire. This transition was not always smooth or immediate, as converting an entire population from traditional beliefs to a new faith tends to be complicated, rather like trying to convince everyone to switch to a completely different operating system for their computers. As the Western Roman Empire began to decline in the 5th and 6th centuries AD, Croatia found itself increasingly on the frontier between the civilized world and the barbarian territories beyond. This position would prove to be both a blessing and a curse in the centuries to come, providing opportunities for trade and cultural exchange, while also making the region a target for various migrating peoples seeking new homes or simply better real estate opportunities. The Roman legacy in Croatia was profound and lasting. The cities they built became the foundations for medieval and modern urban centres. Their roads provided transportation networks that remained in use for centuries. Their legal and administrative systems influenced Croatian institutions long after the empire itself had faded into history. Most importantly, perhaps, the Romans demonstrated that this beautiful land between the mountains and the sea could support sophisticated civilizations, complex economies, and remarkable architectural achievements. When we look at modern Croatia today, with its stunning coastline, historic cities, and vibrant culture, we are seeing the latest chapter in a story that began with those ancient Illyrian hilltop settlements. The Roman period established many of the patterns that would define Croatian development for the next 2 millennia. The importance of coastal trade, the strategic significance of the region's position between different worlds, and the remarkable ability of the Croatian lands to absorb and synthesize influences from multiple civilizations while maintaining their own distinct character. The decline of Roman power in Croatia was not a sudden collapse, but rather a gradual transition that took place over several centuries. As central authority weakened, local administrators and military commanders increasingly operated independently, making decisions based on immediate regional needs rather than distant imperial policies. This decentralization actually helped preserve many Roman institutions and practices, as local leaders found that Roman administrative systems worked quite well for running cities and collecting taxes, even without an emperor looking over their shoulders. Archaeological evidence from this transitional period reveals fascinating insights into daily life as the Roman world slowly transformed. In cities like Salona, which had grown to become one of the largest urban centres in the eastern Adriatic, we find evidence of continued prosperity well into the 6th century. Markets still bustled with activity, workshops continued producing goods for local and regional trade, and public baths remained operational. Because apparently, even during the collapse of civilization, people still wanted to stay clean and socialize. The famous Roman amphitheatre in Pula tells a particularly interesting story about this transition period. As gladiatorial games became less popular and more expensive to organize, the arena found new purposes. Local communities used it for public meetings, religious gatherings, and even as a temporary fortress during times of trouble. Medieval modifications added houses and workshops inside the arena walls, creating a unique urban environment where families lived and worked in spaces once reserved for mortal combat. It was history's most dramatic example of adaptive reuse, though probably with better safety records than the original entertainment program. The linguistic legacy of the Roman period deserves special attention, as it profoundly influenced the development of Croatian language and culture. While Slavic languages would eventually become dominant, Latin remained the language of the church, law, and educated society for centuries. This created a fascinating multilingual environment where a single conversation might include Latin legal terms, Slavic everyday vocabulary, and remnants of Illyrian place names that had survived multiple conquests and cultural transformations. Roman agricultural innovations also left lasting impacts on Croatian farming practices. The Romans had introduced advanced irrigation systems, improved ploughing techniques, and systematic crop rotation methods that increased agricultural productivity dramatically. They also brought new crops including grapes for winemaking, olives for oil production, and various Mediterranean vegetables that adapted well to the Croatian climate. The terraced hillsides of Istria and Dalmatia, still used for vineyards today, often follow patterns established by Roman agricultural engineers nearly 2,000 years ago. Perhaps most importantly, the Roman period established Croatia's identity as a crossroads between different worlds. The region served as a bridge between the Italian peninsula and the Balkan interior, between Mediterranean and continental European cultures, and between the Latin West and the Greek East. This position brought both opportunities and challenges that would define Croatian history for centuries to come. Traders, missionaries, armies, and ideas all passed through these lands, leaving traces that became part of the complex cultural heritage we associate with Croatia today. Chapter 2: Medieval Kingdoms and Venetian Intrigue. As the morning mist lifts from the Adriatic shores, revealing ancient stone walls that have witnessed 1,000 years of political intrigue, we find ourselves in medieval Croatia, where kings wore crowns blessed by popes, merchants sailed dangerous waters for profit, and the chess game of European diplomacy was played out on a board of islands and coastal cities. So settle deeper into your pillows as we explore how Croatian kings built a kingdom that would become the envy of its neighbours and the target of ambitious republics across the sea. The transformation from Roman province to Croatian kingdom was not a sudden dramatic event, like flipping a light switch in a medieval castle that definitely didn't have electricity. Instead, it was a gradual process spanning centuries as Slavic tribes gradually established themselves in the ruins of Roman Dalmatia, building new political structures on foundations that still echoed with Latin prayers and Byzantine administrative efficiency. The Croats arrived in the Balkans during the great Slavic migrations of the 6th and 7th centuries, probably travelling from somewhere in the region of modern-day Poland. They were not a single massive army marching in formation, but rather multiple groups who arrived in waves, settled in different areas, and gradually coalesced into recognizable political entities. The early Croatian leaders were called knez, which translates roughly as duke, and they ruled over tribal territories that were constantly shifting, expanding, contracting, and occasionally disappearing entirely when neighbouring rulers proved more persuasive with their armies. Among the most significant early Croatian rulers was Duke Trpimir, who ruled from 845 to 864 and is often considered the founder of the Trpimirovic dynasty that would dominate Croatian politics for the next several centuries. Trpimir left behind a charter that referred to his realm as the Regnum Croatorum, which was either remarkably forward-thinking royal branding or an early example of political optimism, since he was still technically just a duke at the time. The political landscape of early medieval Croatia was extraordinarily complex, with multiple power centres, shifting alliances, and the constant presence of larger empires trying to extend their influence. The Byzantine Empire controlled the major coastal cities like Split, Zadar, and Dubrovnik, treating them as autonomous city-states under imperial protection. Meanwhile, the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne was expanding eastward, claiming suzerainty over various Croatian territories and attempting to impose Frankish administrative systems on people who had their own perfectly functional ways of organizing society. Thank you very much. The coastal cities during this period developed into remarkable centres of trade and culture, maintaining their Roman legal traditions while adapting to new political realities. Split, built within the walls of Diocletian's palace, had evolved into a thriving medieval city where merchants conducted business in former imperial apartments and bishops held services in temples that had once honoured Roman gods. The city retained significant autonomy, which was essential because nobody really wanted to explain to the locals that they needed to abandon their comfortable homes inside a UNESCO-quality Roman palace. Venice began asserting its influence in Croatian waters during the 9th century, initially motivated by the practical concern that Croatian and Narentine pirates were disrupting Venetian trade routes. Venice at this time was an ambitious merchant republic that treated the Adriatic Sea as essentially its private lake, and they were deeply annoyed by anyone who suggested that sailing through Croatian waters should involve paying taxes or tolls. The Venetian response to this inconvenience was characteristically direct. They built bigger ships, hired more soldiers, and began a centuries-long campaign to bring the entire eastern Adriatic coast under their control. The turning point in Croatian political development came with King Tomislav, who ruled from approximately 910 to 928. And achieved the remarkable feat of uniting the various Croatian duchies into a single kingdom. Tomislav was a member of the Trpimirovic dynasty and a political genius who understood that survival in medieval Europe required not just military strength, but also diplomatic finesse and religious legitimacy. Tomislav's coronation around 925 was a masterpiece of medieval political theatre, involving papal approval, episcopal ceremonies, and probably a considerable amount of wine and roasted meat for the assembled nobility. Pope John X addressed him as King of the Croats in official correspondence, which provided the international recognition that transformed Tomislav from a successful duke into a legitimate king whose realm deserved respect from other European powers. The Croatia that Tomislav ruled was impressive by any medieval standard, stretching from the Adriatic coast deep into the interior regions of Bosnia and parts of what is now Montenegro. According to Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, Croatia could field an army of 100,000 infantry and 60,000 cavalry, supported by a navy of 80 large ships and 100 smaller vessels. These numbers were almost certainly exaggerated for diplomatic effect, but they indicate that Croatia was perceived as a significant military power, capable of defending its independence and projecting force beyond its borders. Tomislav's greatest military achievement came in 926 or 927, when he defeated a major Bulgarian invasion in the Battle of the Bosnian Highlands. Tsar Simeon I of Bulgaria had sent an army under Duke Alogobotur to crush Croatian resistance and extend Bulgarian control to the Adriatic. Instead, Tomislav's forces destroyed the Bulgarian army so thoroughly that Constantine VII recorded that the Bulgars were all killed by the Croats, which was probably hyperbole but suggests a decisive Croatian victory that established the kingdom's reputation as a serious military power. The internal organization of Tomislav's kingdom reflected a sophisticated understanding of medieval governance, combining traditional Croatian tribal structures with administrative innovations borrowed from Byzantium and the Frankish Empire. The kingdom was divided into counties called Županije, each governed by a Župan who served as both civil administrator and military commander. This system provided effective local governance while maintaining royal authority, and it proved flexible enough to accommodate the diverse populations and geographic challenges of the Croatian territories. Religious affairs in the Croatian kingdom presented unique challenges and opportunities. The coastal cities maintained their connections to Rome and the Latin liturgy, while many inland areas had adopted Christianity through Byzantine missionaries who used Slavonic liturgy and Glagolitic script. This created a complex religious landscape where Latin and Slavonic traditions coexisted, sometimes harmoniously and sometimes in tension that required delicate diplomatic management. The Council of Split in 925, convened by Pope John X with Tomislav's participation, addressed these religious complexities and established frameworks for church governance that would influence Croatian Christianity for centuries to come. The council confirmed the primacy of Latin liturgy, while allowing limited use of Slavonic in certain circumstances, creating a compromise that satisfied most parties and established Croatia's position within the broader Catholic Church. Following Tomislav's death around 928, the Croatian kingdom continued to develop under his successors, though none quite matched his combination of military success and diplomatic skill. King Krešimir III expanded royal authority over additional Dalmatian territories, while his son, Peter Krešimir IV, achieved perhaps the greatest territorial extent of the medieval Croatian kingdom during his reign from 1058 to 1074. Peter Krešimir IV was known as the Great for good reasons, presiding over a period of economic prosperity, territorial expansion, and cultural development that represented the high point of independent Croatian royal power. His kingdom extended from Istria in the north to the Neretva River in the south, encompassing most of modern Croatia, significant portions of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and parts of Montenegro. The royal court developed sophisticated administrative systems, patronized religious institutions, and maintained diplomatic relations with major European powers. The king's control over Dalmatian cities marked a significant departure from previous arrangements, as Peter Krešimir IV succeeded in bringing Split, Trogir, and other coastal centres under direct royal authority, rather than leaving them as autonomous Byzantine protectorates. This expansion brought considerable wealth from maritime trade into royal coffers and provided the kingdom with important strategic advantages, though it also attracted unwanted attention from Venice and other powers with their own designs on the profitable Dalmatian coast. Venice's response to Croatian expansion was characteristically ambitious and patient, involving decades of careful diplomatic maneuvering, strategic alliances, and occasional military interventions designed to gradually weaken Croatian control over the coastal cities. The Venetians understood that direct conquest would be difficult and expensive, so they preferred to work through local factions, support rival claimants, and gradually establish economic dependencies that would make Venetian protection seem attractive to coastal elites. The final king of the independent Croatian kingdom was Demetrius Zvonimir, who ruled from 1075 to 1089, and whose reign marked both the culmination and the beginning of the end of Croatian royal independence. Zvonimir was crowned by papal legate at the Church of St. Peter and Moses in Solin, receiving a crown that symbolized his authority as King of Croatia and Dalmatia and his position as a loyal Catholic monarch under papal protection. Zvonimir's reign was notable for internal peace, economic prosperity, and strong diplomatic relationships with neighbouring powers, including a marriage alliance with the Hungarian royal family through his wife Helena, sister of future Hungarian King Ladislaus I. This marriage would prove to have momentous consequences for Croatian history, though probably nobody at the wedding reception was thinking about long-term geopolitical implications while they were enjoying the medieval equivalent of a dance party. The crisis that ended Croatian independence began with Zvonimir's death in 1089 without a male heir, creating a succession dispute that would ultimately determine the fate of the kingdom. According to some sources, Zvonimir died during a rebellion of Croatian nobles who opposed his plans to support papal crusading efforts, though the exact circumstances of his death remain historically unclear and probably involved significantly more political intrigue than surviving chronicles reveal. The succession crisis that followed Zvonimir's death lasted for several years and involved multiple claimants, foreign interventions, and considerable bloodshed as various factions attempted to establish legitimate royal authority. Stephen II briefly held the throne but died in 1091, followed by Petar Snačić, who was elected king by Croatian nobles in 1093 and represented the last attempt to maintain independent Croatian royal authority. Meanwhile, Hungarian King Ladislaus I claimed the Croatian throne through his sister Helena's marriage to Zvonimir, arguing that he inherited legitimate rights to the Croatian kingdom. Ladislaus invaded Croatia in 1091, initially making significant territorial gains in the northern regions, but encountering fierce resistance from Petar Snačić and his supporters, who controlled the traditional Croatian heartland around Knin and were determined to preserve national independence. The final military confrontation came in 1097 at the Battle of Gvozd Mountain, where Hungarian forces under King Koloman defeated Petar Snačić's army and killed the last independent Croatian king. This battle effectively ended the Croatian kingdom's independence, though the transition to Hungarian rule was formalized through negotiations that preserved significant Croatian autonomy and traditional privileges. The Pacta Conventa, concluded between 1102 and 1108 between Croatian nobles and King Koloman, established the framework for the Croatian-Hungarian personal union that would last until 1918. This agreement preserved Croatian legal traditions, administrative structures, and noble privileges, while acknowledging Hungarian royal authority, creating a unique political arrangement that maintained Croatian identity within a larger multinational monarchy. Even as Croatian political independence ended, the coastal cities continued their complex dance with Venice, which gradually extended its control over Dalmatian territories through a combination of military pressure, economic incentives, and diplomatic maneuvering that would characterize Venetian-Croatian relations for the next several centuries. The legacy of the medieval Croatian kingdom extended far beyond its political boundaries. The royal court at Nin had become a center of cultural synthesis, where Latin learning, Slavonic traditions, and Byzantine influences combined to create distinctive Croatian cultural patterns that would persist through centuries of foreign rule. Croatian nobles had developed sophisticated legal traditions, including customary laws that protected property rights, regulated trade relationships, and established dispute resolution procedures reflecting both Roman legal principles and Slavic community practices. The economic foundations of the Croatian kingdom rested on agricultural production, maritime trade, and craft manufacturing that created wealth sufficient to support royal courts, maintain armies, and fund impressive architectural projects. Croatian silver mines in the interior provided precious metals for coins bearing royal inscriptions, while coastal cities generated customs revenues from lucrative Mediterranean trade networks connecting Western Europe with Byzantium and the Islamic world. The Glagolitic script, adapted for Croatian use during the kingdom's peak years, represented a unique cultural achievement that distinguished Croatian Christianity from both Latin and Greek traditions. This script allowed for the development of a distinctively Croatian religious and literary culture that preserved Slavonic liturgical traditions while maintaining communion with Rome. The medieval Croatian kingdom had established traditions of legal autonomy, cultural distinctiveness, and political resilience that would prove remarkably durable, surviving foreign rule and contributing to the emergence of modern Croatian national identity. Chapter 3: Ottoman Frontier and Habsburg Rule. As dawn breaks over the misty valleys of central Croatia, we can almost hear the distant echo of cannon fire that once thundered across these hills, and the marching songs of soldiers who spent centuries defending a frontier that would reshape the very soul of this land. Tonight we venture into an era when Croatia became Europe's shield against Ottoman expansion, a period when peaceful villages transformed into fortress towns, and when the very concept of home meant something you might have to abandon at a moment's notice. So pull your covers a little closer as we explore how Croats learned to live between two empires, becoming masters of survival in one of history's longest and most consequential border conflicts. The catastrophic Battle of Mohacs on August 29th, 1526, marked not just the end of an independent Hungarian kingdom, but the beginning of Croatia's 300-year ordeal as the front line of Christian Europe's defence against Ottoman expansion. King Louis II of Hungary and Bohemia, young and inexperienced, had led his forces into a marshy plain near the Danube, where Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent waited with an army that included 300 cannons against the Hungarians' mere 50. The result was a slaughter that killed the king, destroyed the royal army, and left Central Europe defensively naked before the most powerful military machine of the 16th century. When news of the disaster reached Croatian nobles, they faced an existential choice that would determine their nation's fate for centuries to come. They could attempt to maintain independence as a small kingdom surrounded by hostile powers. They could seek Ottoman protection like many Balkan nobles had done, or they could throw their lot in with the Habsburg dynasty that promised military assistance against the Turkish threat. In 1527, at the Assembly of Cetin, Croatian nobles made a decision that seemed pragmatic at the time, but would prove to have profound long-term consequences for Croatian political development. The election of Ferdinand I as King of Croatia marked the beginning of the Croatian-Habsburg relationship that would endure until 1918. But this was not a simple annexation or conquest. The Croatian nobles negotiated carefully, preserving many traditional rights, including the authority of the Sabor, the Croatian parliament, and maintaining Croatian legal traditions within the broader Habsburg administrative framework. This arrangement created a unique political structure where Croatia retained significant autonomy while gaining access to the military and financial resources of a major European power. However, the Habsburg promise of military protection came with geographical costs that would prove devastating for Croatian territorial integrity. As Ottoman armies pushed northward from their bases in Bosnia and Serbia, vast areas of traditional Croatian territory fell under Turkish control, including important cities like Bihać, Sisak, and much of the fertile agricultural region of Slavonia. Croatian political authority gradually contracted to a small mountainous region around Zagreb that contemporary observers mockingly called the remnant of the remnants, though the locals probably found this description less amusing than foreign diplomats did. The Habsburg response to Ottoman expansion was characteristically systematic and thoroughly German in its administrative complexity. Beginning in 1553 under the military commander Ivan Lenković, the Austrian authorities established the military frontier, or Vojna Krajina, a unique administrative zone that stretched along the Ottoman border from the Adriatic coast to the mountains of Transylvania. This was not simply a series of fortifications, but an entirely different system of governance, society, and economy specifically designed to create a permanent defensive barrier against Ottoman incursions. The military frontier operated under direct imperial control from Vienna, bypassing Croatian civil authorities and creating a parallel administrative structure that answered only to the Habsburg War Council. This arrangement reflected Austrian priorities. They needed effective military defense more than they needed to respect traditional Croatian political sensitivities. The Austrians quickly discovered that effective frontier defense required not just fortresses and cannons, but entirely new approaches to settlement patterns, agricultural organization, and social structures that could function under constant military threat. Perhaps the most consequential aspect of the military frontier was its settlement policy, which fundamentally altered the demographic composition of Croatian territories in ways that would influence regional politics for centuries to come. The Austrians discovered that the traditional Croatian population was insufficient to defend the extensive frontier, so they actively recruited settlers from regions under Ottoman control, offering free land, religious freedom, and exemption from feudal obligations to anyone willing to serve as a frontier soldier. The majority of these new settlers were Orthodox Christian Serbs fleeing Ottoman rule, along with Vlachs and other Balkan populations who brought their own languages, customs, and religious traditions to regions that had previously been predominantly Catholic Croatian. The Statute of Valachorum of 1630 formally codified the rights and obligations of these settlers, creating a legal framework that guaranteed religious tolerance while requiring military service from every male between the ages of 16 and 66, which was essentially a lifetime commitment to armed vigilance. This massive demographic engineering project created a unique social structure along the Croatian-Ottoman frontier where communities organized their entire existence around military readiness while maintaining agricultural self-sufficiency. Villages became fortress towns, where every adult male was simultaneously a farmer and a soldier, where children learned to load muskets before they learned to read, and where Sunday church services included prayers for protection against raiders who might arrive on Monday morning. The frontier produced a distinctly militarized culture that valued courage, self-reliance, and community solidarity above the more peaceful virtues that flourished in regions with stable governments and predictable harvests. The Ottoman side of this equation was equally complex, as the Turkish Empire developed its own administrative and military systems for governing their newly acquired Croatian territories. The Ottomans established the Sanjak of Bosnia, which included much of central and eastern Croatia, and later created additional administrative units as they expanded their control northward. Unlike the Habsburg territories, where Christian populations retained their religious freedom, Ottoman-controlled areas experienced significant religious and cultural pressures as Islamic institutions gradually established themselves. Some Croatian nobles in Ottoman territories converted to Islam to preserve their lands and social status, creating a complex religious and political landscape where traditional Croatian identity had to adapt to new realities. These converted nobles, known as Potočenjaci, often maintained connections to their Christian relatives while serving the Ottoman state, creating networks of relationship that sometimes facilitated communication and sometimes enabled more effective military intelligence gathering on both sides of the frontier. The daily reality of life on the Croatian-Ottoman frontier defied simple characterization as perpetual warfare between Christian and Muslim civilization. While major military campaigns certainly occurred with devastating regularity, the practical necessities of trade, agriculture, and basic survival created extensive networks of cooperation that crossed religious and political boundaries. Croatian and Serbian merchants routinely conducted business in Ottoman towns. Islamic and Christian farmers shared seasonal labor during harvest times, and even military commanders sometimes collaborated when faced with common threats like bandit raids or natural disasters. Yet the underlying military tension never disappeared completely, creating a society where peaceful cooperation alternated unpredictably with sudden violence. Ottoman raiders might attack Croatian villages in spring, but the same communities could be trading horses and grain with Turkish merchants by autumn. This created a distinctive frontier mentality, where people learned to maintain friendly relationships with neighbors, while simultaneously preparing to defend against those same neighbors if political circumstances changed, which they did with alarming frequency. The long-term consequences of this frontier existence were profound for Croatian social and cultural development. Traditional feudal structures largely disappeared in frontier regions, replaced by more egalitarian communities where survival depended on mutual cooperation rather than aristocratic hierarchy. The constant military pressure created strong traditions of local self-government, community decision-making, and collective responsibility that would later influence Croatian political culture in ways that extended far beyond the frontier regions themselves. The Croatian Catholic Church played a crucial role in maintaining cultural continuity during this period of political fragmentation and territorial loss. Bishops and parish priests often served as the primary links between scattered Croatian communities, preserving traditions, maintaining educational institutions, and providing spiritual comfort to populations living under constant stress. The Church also served as a diplomatic intermediary, sometimes negotiating prisoner exchanges or temporary truces that provided brief respites from military conflict. Habsburg military technology and tactics gradually evolved to meet the challenges of frontier warfare, developing new approaches that combined traditional European siege warfare with guerrilla tactics learned from their Ottoman opponents. Croatian frontier soldiers became renowned throughout Europe for their skill in irregular warfare, their knowledge of difficult terrain, and their ability to conduct long-range reconnaissance missions that provided essential intelligence about Ottoman military preparations. These skills would later prove valuable when Habsburg armies began major counteroffensives against Ottoman positions. The economic impact of prolonged frontier warfare was devastating for Croatian agricultural development and urban growth. Constant military threats made long-term investment in infrastructure extremely risky, while the need to maintain large military forces diverted resources from productive economic activities. Many Croatian towns that had flourished during the medieval period never recovered their previous prosperity, as trade routes shifted northward away from the dangerous frontier regions. The Great Turkish War that began in 1683 finally provided opportunities for Croatian territorial recovery, as Habsburg armies launched systematic campaigns to recapture Ottoman-held territories. The Siege of Vienna in 1683 marked the high point of Ottoman expansion into Europe, but its failure initiated a period of Austrian military success that would gradually restore Croatian lands to Christian control over the following decades. Croatian soldiers played prominent roles in the Austrian campaigns that culminated in the Treaty of Karlowitz in 1699, which returned most of Slavonia and significant portions of central Croatia to Habsburg control. However, these newly recovered territories had been substantially depopulated and economically devastated by centuries of warfare, requiring massive reconstruction efforts that would take generations to complete. The demographic legacy of the military frontier period would prove to be one of the most enduring consequences of the Ottoman-Habsburg conflict in Croatian history. The settlement of Orthodox Serbian populations in traditionally Croatian regions created ethnic and religious diversity that enriched Croatian cultural life, while also creating potential sources of political tension that would persist well into the modern era. When the military frontier was finally abolished in 1881 and its territories integrated into civilian Croatian administration, it left behind a complex heritage of military traditions, cultural diversity, and institutional experiences that had profoundly shaped Croatian society. The frontier had created generations of Croats who understood themselves as defenders of European Christianity, while also learning to live peacefully with neighbours of different faiths and ethnicities. The Habsburg administrative systems that developed during the frontier period also had lasting impacts on Croatian legal and political traditions. The necessity of governing diverse populations with different religious and cultural backgrounds led to innovative approaches to law and administration that balanced central imperial authority with local autonomy. Croatian legal scholars and administrators gained valuable experience in multicultural governance that would serve them well in later historical periods. The educational and cultural institutions that emerged during the Habsburg period reflected this complex mixing of traditions and practical necessities. Schools in frontier regions often taught multiple languages and accommodated different religious calendars, while Croatian intellectuals developed increasingly sophisticated arguments for maintaining their cultural distinctiveness within the broader imperial framework. The University of Zagreb, founded in 1669, became a crucial centre for Croatian intellectual life and helped preserve Croatian scholarly traditions during periods of political uncertainty. Croatian military traditions that developed during the frontier centuries created lasting influences on national culture that extended far beyond purely military concerns. The celebration of military holidays, the preservation of battlefield sites, and the development of epic poetry commemorating frontier heroes all became integral parts of Croatian cultural identity. These traditions provided models of courage and sacrifice that would inspire later generations of Croats facing different but equally challenging historical circumstances. The architectural legacy of the frontier period remains visible throughout Croatian lands today in the form of fortress towns, defensive walls, and strategic settlements that reflect centuries of military planning and community cooperation. Many Croatian cities retain their fortress-like centres and Croatian cities, surrounded by more modern development that spreads outward from defensive cores that once provided refuge for entire rural populations during times of acute military danger. These stone witnesses to Croatia's turbulent past continue to shape urban landscapes and remind visitors of the extraordinary challenges that previous generations overcame through determination and collective effort. The Ottoman period in Croatian history, despite its undeniable hardships and territorial losses, also contributed to the development of a distinctive Croatian identity that emphasized resilience, adaptability, and cultural survival under adverse circumstances. These qualities would prove essential as Croatia faced new challenges in the centuries that followed, when different empires and ideologies would test Croatian determination to maintain their distinctive place in the complex mosaic of Central European civilization. Chapter 4: Yugoslav Chapters. As twilight settles over the Danube plains and shadows lengthen across the mountainous landscapes of the Balkans, we find ourselves entering one of the most complex and ultimately tragic chapters in Croatian history. This is the story of Yugoslavia, a bold experiment in South Slavic unity that began with noble ideals of brotherhood among related peoples and ended in devastating wars that shocked the world. So, settle comfortably as we explore how Croatia spent most of the 20th century as part of a larger federation, experiencing both the promise and the peril of multinational statehood. The collapse of Austria-Hungary in 1918 presented Croatian leaders with an unprecedented opportunity to reshape their nation's destiny, but it also confronted them with difficult choices that would influence Croatian development for the next 7 decades. The Habsburg Empire that had governed Croatian lands for 4 centuries was disintegrating under the pressures of military defeat, economic collapse, and nationalist revolutions that were erupting across Central Europe like a chain reaction of political upheaval. Croatian politicians found themselves caught between several competing visions for their nation's future. Some advocated for complete independence, creating a sovereign Croatian state that would finally fulfill the medieval dream of restored Croatian kingship. Others preferred seeking protection from Italy, which had been promised substantial Adriatic territories in the secret Treaty of London, and seemed willing to extend its influence over Croatian coastal regions. A third option involved joining with other South Slavic peoples in a new federal state that could provide security through collective strength. The decision to join Yugoslavia came through a series of political negotiations that were both hasty and historically momentous. In October 1918, as Habsburg authority collapsed entirely, the Croatian Sabor voted to sever ties with Austria-Hungary and declared Croatian unification with other South Slavic territories. Within weeks, Croatian representatives were travelling to Belgrade to negotiate the terms under which Croatia would join with Serbia and Montenegro in creating the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. The unification ceremony on December 1st, 1918, was both a celebration and a gamble, as Croatian leaders essentially bet their nation's future on the possibility that South Slavic unity could provide security and prosperity that independent Croatia might not achieve alone. Prince Alexander Karađorđević proclaimed the new kingdom in Belgrade, creating a state that encompassed most of the Yugoslav territories that would persist in various forms until the 1990s. Though probably nobody at the ceremony anticipated, they were launching an experiment that would last for 73 tumultuous years. The early years of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes revealed fundamental disagreements about how the new state should be organized, disagreements that would plague Yugoslav politics for decades to come. Serbian politicians generally favored centralized government based in Belgrade, arguing that strong central authority was necessary to defend against external threats and create efficient administration across diverse regions. Croatian leaders, by contrast, preferred federal arrangements that would preserve Croatian autonomy and protect distinctive Croatian cultural and legal traditions. The constitutional crisis that emerged in the early 1920s reflected these deeper tensions about the nature of Yugoslav identity and governance. The Vidovdan constitution, adopted in 1921, established a unitary monarchy that essentially extended Serbian administrative systems across the entire kingdom, much to the disappointment of Croatian politicians who had expected federal structures that would recognize Croatian distinctiveness within the broader Yugoslav framework. Stjepan Radić and his Croatian Peasant Party emerged as the primary opposition to what many Croatians perceived as Serbian hegemony disguised as Yugoslav unity. Radić advocated for Croatian autonomy within a reorganized Yugoslav federation, and his party consistently won overwhelming electoral support in Croatian territories, demonstrating that popular sentiment strongly favored Croatian self-governance rather than integration into a Serbian-dominated system. The political crisis reached a tragic climax in 1928 when Serbian deputy Puniša Račić opened fire on Croatian representatives in the Yugoslav parliament, killing 2 deputies immediately and fatally wounding Stjepan Radić, who died several weeks later from his injuries. This assassination shocked Croatian public opinion and convinced many that peaceful coexistence within the existing Yugoslav framework was impossible, setting the stage for more radical solutions to the Croatian question. King Alexander's response to the parliamentary crisis was to abolish the constitution, ban political parties, and establish a royal dictatorship that renamed the country Yugoslavia in 1929. Alexander hoped that removing ethnic designations from political life would encourage genuine Yugoslav unity, but his authoritarian approach actually intensified regional resentments while providing no constructive outlets for legitimate political grievances. The extreme Croatian response came in the form of the Ustasha movement, founded by Ante Pavelić in 1929 as a fascist organization dedicated to Croatian independence through violence if necessary. The Ustasha received support from Mussolini's Italy, which provided training camps and financial assistance to Croatian terrorists who conducted several spectacular attacks against Yugoslav targets, culminating in the assassination of King Alexander in Marseille in 1934. World War II brought the collapse of the Yugoslav kingdom and the establishment of the independent state of Croatia, a Nazi puppet regime that represented both the fulfillment and the perversion of Croatian independence aspirations. Ante Pavelić returned from exile to lead a state that encompassed most Croatian territories, plus Bosnia and Herzegovina, creating the largest Croatian political entity since medieval times, but at the terrible cost of becoming a genocidal regime that murdered hundreds of thousands of Serbs, Jews, and Roma. The independent state of Croatia implemented racial laws based on Nazi ideology and operated a network of concentration camps, most notoriously Jasenovac, where the Ustasha regime murdered an estimated 80,000 victims through methods that shocked even German observers. The regime's brutality alienated many Croatians who had initially welcomed independence, driving them into opposition movements that would ultimately contribute to the regime's downfall. Meanwhile, Josip Broz Tito was organizing communist-led partisan resistance that attracted supporters from all Yugoslav nationalities, including many Croatians who were appalled by Ustasha atrocities and wanted to fight for a more just social order. Tito's movement promised a new Yugoslavia based on equality among nations, socialist economic development, and liberation from foreign domination, themes that appealed to many who had become disillusioned with both royal dictatorship and fascist independence. The partisan movement that emerged during the war was remarkable for its success in creating liberated territories, maintaining popular support across ethnic lines, and developing sophisticated political programs for post-war reconstruction. Croatian partisans played crucial roles in military operations that gradually drove German and Italian forces from Yugoslav territories, while Croatian communist leaders helped design federal structures that would govern post-war Yugoslavia. The establishment of socialist Yugoslavia in 1945 represented a completely new approach to South Slavic unity, based on federalism, national equality, and communist ideology, rather than monarchy and Serbian dominance. The new state comprised 6 republics: Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia and Macedonia, each with its own government, parliament and cultural institutions, while overall coordination remained with the federal authorities in Belgrade. Tito's Yugoslavia initially followed Soviet models of development, implementing central planning, collective agriculture, and single-party rule, while maintaining close ties with Stalin's government in Moscow. However, the Yugoslav leadership gradually developed more independent policies, particularly after the dramatic break with Stalin in 1948 that forced Yugoslavia to chart its own course between East and West during the Cold War. The Croatian experience within socialist Yugoslavia was generally positive during the 1950s and 60s, as the federal system allowed for significant Croatian autonomy while providing access to resources for economic development and cultural advancement. Croatian language and literature flourished. Zagreb emerged as a major industrial and educational centre, and the Adriatic coast became a crucial source of tourist income that benefited the entire federation. However, tensions persisted beneath the surface of Yugoslav unity, particularly regarding economic policy and cultural rights. Many Croatians felt that their republic contributed more to federal revenues than it received back in investment, and there were ongoing disputes about language policy, cultural autonomy, and the degree of centralization appropriate for a socialist federation that supposedly guaranteed national equality. The Croatian Spring of 1971 represented the most serious challenge to federal authority since the war, as Croatian students and intellectuals organized mass demonstrations demanding greater autonomy, linguistic rights, and economic justice for their republic. The movement began with student protests but gradually expanded to include prominent Croatian communist leaders who supported many of the protesters' demands. Tito's response to the Croatian Spring was swift and decisive, involving mass arrests, purges of Croatian communist leadership, and constitutional reforms that actually strengthened federal control while making some concessions to Croatian concerns. The suppression of the movement eliminated its immediate leadership, but did not resolve the underlying issues that had motivated Croatian dissatisfaction with federal arrangements. The 1970s and 80s saw gradual economic stagnation and increasing political tensions as Yugoslavia struggled with inflation, unemployment, and growing regional disparities that undermined federal cohesion. Tito's death in 1980 removed the one leader who had been able to maintain unity through personal authority and political skill, leaving behind a rotating presidency that lacked both legitimacy and effectiveness. The collapse of communist governments across Eastern Europe in 1989 created new possibilities for political change in Yugoslavia, but it also intensified nationalist movements that challenged the federal framework itself. Croatian elections in 1990 brought Franjo Tudman and his Croatian Democratic Union to power on a platform that emphasized Croatian sovereignty and cultural revival. The final crisis of Yugoslavia began with Slovenian and Croatian declarations of independence in June 1991, actions that triggered military intervention by the Yugoslav People's Army and the beginning of wars that would devastate the region for most of the decade. Croatian independence was achieved through a brutal conflict that displaced hundreds of thousands of people and destroyed much of the infrastructure that had been built during the socialist period. The Yugoslav experiment thus ended in tragedy, despite its initial promise of creating a peaceful, prosperous federation of South Slavic peoples. For Croatia, the Yugoslav period had provided opportunities for economic development, cultural expression, and political participation that would not have been possible in a small, independent state, but it also demonstrated the difficulties of maintaining multinational federations when economic problems and political manipulation inflame ethnic tensions. The transformation of Croatia from Habsburg province to Yugoslav Republic, and finally to independent nation, demonstrates the remarkable adaptability of Croatian political culture in the face of changing international circumstances. Throughout the 20th century, Croatian leaders repeatedly faced impossible choices between competing loyalties and uncertain futures, making decisions that seemed reasonable at the time but often carried unforeseen consequences that shaped Croatian development for decades. The constitutional arrangements that governed Croatia within Yugoslavia evolved significantly over 7 decades, reflecting both changing international conditions and internal pressure for greater autonomy. The centralized monarchy of the interwar period gave way to communist federalism that provided substantial Croatian self-governance, which then gradually eroded during the economic and political crises of the 1980s that ultimately made independence seem preferable to continued federation. Croatian cultural achievements during the Yugoslav period were substantial and lasting, including the development of modern Croatian literature, cinema, and scholarship that gained international recognition while maintaining distinctive Croatian characteristics. The University of Zagreb became a major center of learning. Croatian writers and filmmakers achieved international success, and Croatian scientists and scholars made important contributions to knowledge in fields ranging from engineering to linguistics. The economic development that occurred during the socialist period provided Croatia with industrial infrastructure, educational institutions, and transportation networks that would prove essential for successful transition to market economy and European integration after independence. The Adriatic Highway, major port facilities, petrochemical plants, and tourism infrastructure all represented Yugoslav-era investments that continued to benefit Croatian economic development long after independence. Perhaps most importantly, the Yugoslav experience taught Croatians valuable lessons about federal governance, minority rights, and multicultural cooperation that would prove essential for successful democratic transition and European integration. Despite its ultimate failure, Yugoslavia provided Croatian political leaders with experience in managing complex multinational institutions and navigating the challenges of balancing local autonomy with broader regional cooperation, skills that would prove invaluable during Croatia's subsequent integration into NATO and the European Union. The demographic changes that occurred during the Yugoslav period also had lasting impacts on Croatian society, as internal migration, urbanization, and intermarriage created more diverse communities, while sometimes diluting traditional regional identities. Cities like Zagreb and Split became cosmopolitan centers that attracted people from across Yugoslavia, creating cultural synthesis that enriched Croatian intellectual and artistic life, even as it sometimes generated tensions about authentic Croatian identity. The legacy of the Yugoslav period in Croatian history remains complex and contested, involving both positive memories of economic progress and cultural achievement, alongside negative associations with political oppression and ethnic conflict. Understanding this period is essential for comprehending modern Croatian identity, as it shaped Croatian institutions, cultural patterns, and political traditions that continue to influence the country's development as an independent European nation. Chapter 5. Geographic Tapestry. As the first light of dawn touches the snow-capped peaks of Dinara and spreads across rolling hills toward the crystalline waters of the Adriatic, we witness daily the geographic symphony that makes Croatia one of Europe's most remarkably diverse landscapes. Tonight, we explore this extraordinary tapestry of mountains, plains, and coastlines that has shaped not just Croatian agriculture and settlement patterns, but the very soul of Croatian culture itself. So let yourself drift into the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against limestone cliffs as we journey through the geographic wonderland that is modern Croatia. Croatia's distinctive boomerang shape embraces an astonishing variety of landscapes within its relatively modest 56,500 square kilometers, creating what geographers describe as one of the most topographically diverse countries in Europe relative to its size. This remarkable geographic diversity results from Croatia's unique position at the intersection of several major European landscape systems, where the Mediterranean meets Central Europe, and where ancient tectonic forces have created a complex mosaic of mountains, plains, and coastlines. The country's geographic character is defined by three major regions that reflect fundamentally different geological histories and climatic influences. The Pannonian Plains in the northeast represent Croatia's continental heart, where vast expanses of fertile farmland stretch toward distant horizons, broken only by gentle hills and meandering rivers. The Dinaric Alps form a magnificent mountainous backbone through the center of the country, creating dramatic landscapes of karst formations, deep valleys, and towering peaks. Meanwhile, the Adriatic basin encompasses the entire coastal region, where limestone cliffs plunge into azure waters and more than 1,200 islands create one of the world's most complex and beautiful archipelagos. The Pannonian Plains, which encompass roughly the northern half of Croatia, are part of a vast lowland system that extends across much of Central Europe and represents the legacy of an ancient inland sea that once covered this entire region. The fertile soils of Slavonia, Croatia's easternmost region, were deposited over millions of years as rivers flowing from surrounding mountains gradually filled the Pannonian Sea with sediments that would become some of Europe's richest agricultural land. This region's gentle topography, with more than half of Croatia lying below 200 meters in elevation, creates ideal conditions for large-scale agriculture and has made Slavonia the country's breadbasket since Roman times. The Sava River, Croatia's longest waterway, flows majestically across this landscape, joined by the Drava and other tributaries that form a network of navigable rivers connecting Croatian agriculture to international markets via the Danube system. The climate of the Pannonian region is decidedly continental, with warm summers perfect for growing wheat, corn, and other grains, and cold winters that bring snow and frost to fields that lie dormant until spring planting. This agricultural rhythm has shaped settlement patterns, cultural traditions, and architectural styles that reflect the practical needs of farming communities, adapted to seasonal variations and the periodic flooding that enriches the soil but also requires careful water management. Rising dramatically from the northern plains, the Dinaric Alps create Croatia's mountainous spine, a limestone wonderland that extends from Slovenia in the northwest to Albania in the southeast, passing through some of the most spectacular karst landscapes in the world. These mountains, formed by ancient geological processes involving the collision of tectonic plates and the gradual dissolution of limestone by slightly acidic rainwater, present a landscape of extraordinary beauty and complexity. Mount Dinara, Croatia's highest peak at 1,831 meters, stands as a monument to the incredible geological forces that shaped this region, though probably without any intention of becoming a tourist attraction or national symbol. The Dinaric system includes numerous subsidiary ranges such as Velebit, Biokovo, and Velika Kapela, each with distinctive characteristics, but all sharing the fundamental limestone geology that creates the region's most remarkable features. Karst topography, which covers approximately half of Croatia's territory, creates landscapes that seem designed by an artist with an unlimited imagination and a particular fondness for caves, underground rivers, and natural limestone sculptures. The interaction between water and limestone over millions of years has carved vast cave systems, including Kitagachashina, which at over 37 kilometers is the longest cave in the Dinaric Alps, providing endless opportunities for exploration by people who enjoy crawling through dark spaces for entertainment. Perhaps the most spectacular expression of Croatian karst landscapes is found at Plitvice Lakes National Park, where 16 terraced lakes connected by cascading waterfalls create one of Europe's most photographed natural wonders. The lakes formed through a unique process involving the deposition of calcium carbonate from mineral-rich waters, creating travertine barriers that constantly evolve as new limestone deposits alter the flow of water through this UNESCO World Heritage landscape. The Plitvice system demonstrates the dynamic nature of karst environments, where geological processes continue to reshape the landscape even today, creating new formations while eroding older ones in an endless cycle of creation and destruction. The intense blue-green colours of the lakes result from their exceptional clarity and mineral content, combined with the reflection of surrounding forests that cover nearly 80% of the park area and provide habitat for brown bears, wolves, and numerous rare species. The transition from mountain to sea creates some of Croatia's most dramatic landscapes, where the Dinaric Alps plunge directly into the Adriatic Sea, forming towering cliffs, hidden coves, and deep harbours that have provided natural protection for coastal settlements throughout history. This abrupt topographic change means that visitors can literally ski in the mountains and swim in the sea on the same day, assuming they have the energy for such athletic adventures. The Croatian coast stretches for 1,777 kilometres along the mainland, while the country's 1,246 islands add another 4,058 kilometres of coastline, creating the most indented shoreline in the Mediterranean and providing endless opportunities for sailing, diving, and simply getting pleasantly lost among secluded bays and charming fishing villages. The largest Croatian islands include Krk and Cres, each covering over 400 square kilometres, along with Brač, famous for its brilliant white limestone that was used to build Diocletian's palace and even contributed to the construction of the White House in Washington. These islands represent the peaks of submerged mountains, creating a landscape where terrestrial and marine environments blend seamlessly, supporting unique ecosystems that include both Mediterranean and alpine species within remarkably small geographic areas. The Adriatic climate brings mild winters and warm, dry summers that support Mediterranean vegetation, including olive trees, lavender, and grapevines that produce some of Europe's most distinctive wines. The famous Bora wind, which can reach hurricane-force velocities as it rushes down from the mountains toward the sea, provides dramatic weather experiences, while also helping to preserve the exceptional clarity of Adriatic waters by preventing stagnation. Croatia's geographic position has created remarkable biodiversity, with the country serving as a meeting point for Mediterranean, Alpine, and Pannonian flora and fauna. Forests cover nearly half of Croatia's land area, ranging from Mediterranean oak and pine woods along the coast to mixed deciduous forests in the mountains and riparian forests along major rivers in the interior. These diverse forest ecosystems support large mammals, including the healthy populations of brown bears and wolves that make Croatia one of Europe's most important wildlife refuges. The complex geography has also created numerous microclimates that support specialized plant communities, including several endemic species found nowhere else in the world. Alpine meadows in the highest mountains bloom with rare orchids and other mountain flowers during brief summer growing seasons, while coastal wetlands provide crucial habitat for migratory birds traveling between northern Europe and Africa along the Adriatic flyway. Water plays a fundamental role in Croatian geography, not just through the obvious importance of the Adriatic Sea and major rivers, but also through the complex underground hydrology of the karst regions. Much of the water that falls as precipitation in the Dinaric Mountains flows through underground channels that may emerge as springs hundreds of kilometers from their origin, creating a hidden network of aquifers that supplies water to much of the country. The interaction between surface water and groundwater in karst regions creates unique hydrogeological phenomena, including intermittent lakes that appear and disappear seasonally, underground rivers that surface as spectacular springs, and cave systems that extend for vast distances beneath the landscape. This underground water system has been crucial for human settlement in regions where surface water is scarce, though it also creates challenges for development and environmental protection. Croatia's geographic diversity has profoundly influenced the country's economic development, with different regions specializing in activities suited to their particular environmental advantages. The fertile plains of Slavonia excel in grain production and livestock raising, while the mountainous regions support forestry and tourism based on outdoor recreation. The coastal areas combine agriculture suited to Mediterranean climates, including wine production and olive cultivation, with maritime industries such as fishing, shipping, and tourism. Tourism, in particular, benefits enormously from Croatia's geographic diversity, allowing visitors to experience Mediterranean beaches, alpine hiking, historic cities, and pristine wilderness areas, all within a relatively compact geographic area. This diversity has made Croatia one of Europe's fastest-growing tourist destinations, though it has also created challenges for managing environmental impacts while preserving the natural beauty that attracts visitors in the first place. The geographic factors that have shaped Croatian development continue to influence the country's future prospects, particularly regarding climate change, adaptation, and sustainable development. Croatia's mountain forests serve as crucial carbon sinks and water storage systems, while the extensive coastline and island communities face challenges from rising sea levels and changing precipitation patterns that could affect both tourism and traditional livelihoods. Understanding Croatia's geographic tapestry is essential for appreciating how this remarkable landscape has shaped the Croatian people and their culture over centuries of adaptation to diverse environmental conditions. From the continental rhythms of Pannonian agriculture to the maritime traditions of Adriatic fishing communities, geography has provided both opportunities and constraints that continue to influence Croatian life in the 21st century. The interconnection between Croatia's diverse geographic regions creates fascinating transition zones where different landscapes and ecosystems meet and blend. The region of Lika, situated between the Pannonian Plains and the Adriatic coast, exemplifies these transitional characteristics, supporting both continental and Mediterranean species while serving as a crucial corridor for wildlife movement and human transportation between Croatia's interior and coastal regions. The Istrian Peninsula in the northwest represents another unique geographic synthesis, where Mediterranean coastal influences meet alpine mountain systems, creating a distinctive peninsular culture that combines Italian, Croatian, and Central European influences. Istria's rolling hills, famous for truffle hunting and wine production, demonstrate how human communities adapt to and enhance particular geographic advantages, creating distinctive regional identities within the broader Croatian national framework. Croatian rivers tell their own geographic stories, with the Sava river system draining toward the Black Sea through the Danube, while shorter coastal rivers like the Kruka and Cetina flow directly into the Adriatic, creating distinct hydrographic basins that have influenced settlement patterns, trade routes, and cultural development throughout Croatian history. These rivers also provide crucial hydroelectric power that supplements Croatia's energy needs while creating recreational opportunities for kayaking, rafting, and fishing. The seasonal rhythms imposed by Croatia's varied geography create annual cycles that continue to influence Croatian culture and economic activity. Spring brings wildflower blooms to mountain meadows and the beginning of tourist season along the coast, while autumn grape harvests in interior valleys coincide with the olive harvest in coastal groves, creating regional festivals and cultural celebrations that reflect deep connections between human communities and their geographic environments. Climate change presents both challenges and opportunities for Croatian geographic regions, with warmer temperatures potentially extending growing seasons in mountain areas, while creating stress on coastal ecosystems and traditional agricultural practices. Croatia's extensive forest cover and karst water storage systems provide natural climate adaptation mechanisms, though they require careful management to maintain their effectiveness as environmental conditions continue to evolve. The geographic knowledge accumulated by Croatian communities over centuries provides valuable insights for contemporary environmental management and sustainable development. Traditional farming practices, traditional architecture, and resource management systems all offer lessons for modern efforts to balance development with environmental preservation. Protected areas throughout Croatia, including 8 national parks and numerous nature parks, demonstrate the country's commitment to preserving its geographic heritage for future generations, while providing opportunities for scientific research, education, and sustainable tourism. These protected landscapes serve as living laboratories where scientists can study ecological processes and environmental adaptation, while visitors can experience the natural beauty that has shaped Croatian culture and identity. As we conclude our journey through Croatia's geographic regions, we can appreciate how this extraordinary landscape continues to evolve, shaped by both natural processes and human activities that must balance development needs with environmental preservation. The geographic foundations explored tonight provide the stage upon which modern Croatian society and culture have developed, creating the beautiful country that attracts millions of visitors and provides home for Croatian people who have learned to live in harmony with one of Europe's most spectacular natural environments. Chapter 6: Culture, Economy, and Daily Life. As our journey through Côte d'Ivoire draws to a close, we arrive at perhaps the most vibrant and complex chapter of all, the living, breathing reality of modern Ivorian life. This is where the threads we've woven through history, politics, and geography come together in the everyday experiences of 28 million people who wake up each morning in a country that perfectly embodies the beautiful complexity of contemporary Africa. Picture Côte d'Ivoire as a massive family reunion where 60 different ethnic groups have gathered under one roof, each bringing their own traditions, languages, and favourite dishes. Somehow, despite occasional disagreements over who gets to control the remote or where to hang the family portraits, they've managed to create something remarkably cohesive. The result is a cultural tapestry so rich and intricate that it makes medieval European courts look positively monotonous by comparison. The foundation of this cultural complexity rests on 4 major ethnic groupings that divide the country like quarters of a cultural compass. In the east, centre, and southeast, the Akan peoples dominate the landscape, descendants of 18th century migrants from the Asante kingdom, who brought sophisticated systems of governance and artistry. The Baoulé, who make up the largest single ethnic group at 23% of the population, trace their origins to Queen Abla Poku's legendary migration, while the Agni and other Akan subgroups maintain distinct identities within this broader family. The southwest belongs to the Kru peoples, probably the oldest residents of present-day Côte d'Ivoire, whose largest group is the Bete. These communities developed hunting and gathering societies that adapted brilliantly to forest environments, creating political structures that emphasized village-level democracy rather than centralized kingdoms. Their cultural contributions include some of West Africa's most distinctive artistic traditions and a fierce independence that has shaped political consciousness throughout the region. Northern Côte d'Ivoire is home to 2 distinct cultural families. The Voltaic peoples, including the Senufo and Lobi, created agricultural societies known for spectacular artistic achievements, particularly in mask-making and sculpture. Meanwhile, the Mande groups, including the Malinké and Dioula, brought trading networks and Islamic influences that connected Côte d'Ivoire to the broader Sahelian world. The Dioula language serves as a lingua franca for trade throughout the region, making it almost as important as French for daily commerce. Language in Côte d'Ivoire reflects this cultural diversity in ways that would make linguists dizzy with excitement. While French serves as the official language and the medium of education and government business, over 60 indigenous languages thrive in daily conversation. A typical Ivorian might conduct business in French, chat with neighbours in Baoulé, bargain at the market in Dula, and sing lullabies in their grandmother's village language. Its linguistic code switching raised to an art form that would impress the most sophisticated polyglots. Religious life adds another layer of complexity to this cultural foundation. According to recent census data, 43% of Ivorians practice Islam, 34% follow various Christian denominations, 4% maintain traditional African religions, and the remainder consider themselves freethinkers or combine multiple belief systems. What makes this particularly interesting is how fluidly many Ivorians move between religious practices, incorporating elements of traditional spirituality into Islamic or Christian worship in ways that create uniquely African expressions of faith. The most remarkable aspect of Ivorian religious life is not the diversity itself, but the general tolerance and peaceful coexistence between communities. While religious differences occasionally align with political tensions, particularly between the Muslim North and Christian South, the everyday reality for most Ivorians involves routine interaction across religious boundaries. Extended families often include members of different faiths, and business partnerships regularly cross religious lines without generating the conflicts that might be expected in other contexts. Art and cultural expression in Côte d'Ivoire represent one of Africa's richest creative traditions, with each ethnic group contributing distinctive styles and techniques that have influenced artistic development across West Africa. No country produces a wider variety of masks than Côte d'Ivoire, with carvers creating everything from the elegant human-like Goli masks of the Baoulé to the dramatic animal-inspired creations of the Dan people in the Western Mountains. These masks aren't museum pieces, but living elements of cultural practice used in ceremonies that mark everything from harvest celebrations to coming-of-age rituals. The Fêtes des Masques, held each December in the city of Man, attracts visitors from across West Africa who come to witness competitions between villages and honour the forest spirits that these elaborate creations represent. It's rather like a combination of Halloween, the Olympics, and a religious ceremony, all rolled into one spectacular cultural event. Music permeates Ivorian life in ways that make it impossible to separate sound from society. The traditional approach emphasizes polyphonic compositions where multiple rhythms and melodies occur simultaneously, creating layered soundscapes that mirror the country's cultural complexity. Every ethnic group has developed distinct musical traditions, from the talking drums that once carried messages across vast distances to the balafon xylophones that accompany storytelling sessions in village squares. The role of griots, traditional storytellers, musicians, and keepers of oral history remains crucial in preserving and transmitting cultural knowledge. These master performers serve as living libraries, carrying genealogies, historical narratives, and moral teachings through generations of carefully practiced songs and stories. Modern Ivorian music blends these traditional foundations with contemporary influences, producing artists like Alpha Blondy, whose reggae music carries messages of social consciousness and African unity to audiences worldwide. Daily life in Côte d'Ivoire varies dramatically between urban and rural environments, creating a country that contains everything from gleaming high-rises to traditional mud brick compounds. Abidjan, the economic capital, pulses with the energy of nearly 6 million people navigating a metropolis that combines French colonial architecture, modern office buildings, and sprawling neighbourhoods where traditional African community structures persist within urban settings. The contrast between Abidjan's sophisticated plateau district, with its banks and government buildings, and the bustling markets of Adjamé, where vendors speaking a dozen languages hawk everything from imported electronics to traditional medicines, captures the essential duality of modern Ivorian life. Urban dwellers navigate between world markets and village traditions, often maintaining strong connections to rural communities while pursuing careers in international business, technology, or the arts. Rural life centers around agricultural rhythms that have sustained communities for generations, though modern influences increasingly penetrate even the most remote villages. Most rural families live in compounds built around courtyards, with structures ranging from traditional mud and thatch constructions to concrete houses with corrugated metal roofs. The extended family remains the basic social unit, with decisions made collectively and resources shared according to traditional obligations and expectations. Food culture provides one of the most accessible windows into Ivorian society, with culinary traditions that reflect both the country's agricultural abundance and its cultural diversity. Rice serves as the foundation for most meals, often accompanied by sauces that vary dramatically between regions and ethnic groups. The national dish, atieke, consists of grated cassava that's fermented and steamed, usually served with grilled fish and spicy pepper sauce that can bring tears to uninitiated eyes. Aloko, fried plantains with onions and hot peppers, represents the kind of street food that fuels daily life across the country, while kejanu, a slow-cooked chicken stew prepared in sealed clay pots, showcases the sophisticated cooking techniques that turn simple ingredients into memorable meals. Meals are typically eaten communally, with everyone gathering around shared dishes and using their right hands to form rice and sauce into bite-sized portions, a practice that reinforces social bonds and cultural values with every shared meal. The economic foundation of modern Côte d'Ivoire rests on agricultural production that has made the country a global powerhouse in several commodities. Cocoa production accounts for 45% of world supply, employing over 6 million people and generating 20% of national GDP. Most production comes from smallholder farmers working 2 to 3 hectare plots using traditional techniques, while seeing only a fraction of profits when their raw beans become expensive chocolate. Beyond cocoa, Côte d'Ivoire is the world's largest cashew producer, with coffee, rubber, palm oil, cotton, and bananas providing additional export earnings. 2/3 of the population remains directly dependent on farming, creating vulnerability to price fluctuations and weather patterns. The government seeks economic diversification through agricultural processing and manufacturing, recognizing that shipping raw materials while importing finished products represents economic weakness. Industrial development has accelerated significantly since the end of civil conflicts in 2011, with investments in food processing, textiles, construction materials, and assembly operations for vehicles and machinery. The port of Abidjan serves as a regional hub for West African trade, handling cargo for landlocked neighbours like Mali and Burkina Faso, while positioning Côte d'Ivoire as a gateway for international commerce. Energy production represents one of the brightest spots in the economic picture, with hydroelectric dams and natural gas discoveries providing both domestic electricity and export opportunities. Côte d'Ivoire maintains some of the highest electricity coverage rates in West Africa, with over 95% of urban areas and nearly 50% of rural communities having access to power. The country exports electricity to neighbouring nations, generating revenue while supporting regional development. However, the benefits of economic growth remain unevenly distributed. Nearly 40% of Ivorians live below the national poverty line, with rural communities and northern regions experiencing higher poverty rates than urban southern areas. While Abidjan's middle class enjoys modern amenities, millions lack access to clean water, adequate healthcare, and reliable education. Education represents both progress and challenges. Primary enrollment exceeds 95% following the abolition of school fees, but 30% of children fail to complete primary education due to poverty or inadequate facilities. Higher education has expanded, but job creation hasn't kept pace with educated graduates entering the workforce. Healthcare follows similar patterns, with quality urban facilities contrasting sharply with limited rural services. The government has initiated mandatory health insurance schemes, but implementation remains incomplete, particularly where formal employment is rare. Traditional healing practices continue playing important roles alongside modern medicine. Family structure remains remarkably resilient despite rapid social change, with extended families continuing to serve as primary support networks for everything from childcare and education to business financing and old age security. However, urbanization and economic pressures are gradually modifying traditional patterns, particularly around marriage, child rearing, and gender roles. Women's roles have evolved significantly, with constitutional guarantees of equal rights and legislation requiring 30% female representation in political positions. However, legal equality hasn't eliminated traditional practices like arranged marriages or female genital mutilation, particularly in rural areas where customary law often takes precedence over national legislation. Women increasingly participate in higher education and professional careers, but they also continue to bear primary responsibility for household management and childcare. The informal economy provides livelihood opportunities for millions of Ivorians who work as market vendors, artisans, transporters, and service providers without formal employment contracts or social protection. This parallel economy demonstrates remarkable creativity and resilience, but it also leaves workers vulnerable to economic shocks and lacking access to credit, training, or retirement security. Looking toward the future, Côte d'Ivoire faces the classic challenges of a developing country, translating resource wealth into broad-based prosperity while managing rapid demographic change. With over 40% of the population under 15, the country must create millions of jobs while improving education and healthcare systems that can support productive lives for young people who will shape the nation's future. Climate change adds urgency to these development challenges, with changing rainfall patterns affecting agricultural productivity and requiring adaptations in farming practices. The loss of forest cover has altered local weather patterns, and continued deforestation threatens both biodiversity and environmental sustainability. Despite these challenges, Côte d'Ivoire's cultural foundation provides remarkable resources for addressing complex problems. The tradition of palaver community discussion and consensus building offers models for democratic participation. The concept of Ubuntu emphasizes communal solidarity and mutual responsibility, providing social capital that helps communities weather difficulties. The hospitality that visitors consistently encounter reflects deeper cultural values about human dignity and community responsibility. The greeting Akwaba welcome represents more than politeness. It embodies a worldview that sees individual well-being as inseparable from community health and prosperity. Côte d'Ivoire's story reminds us that nations, like individuals, are works in progress, constantly evolving through the interaction of historical inheritance and contemporary choices. The elephant paths that once guided traders through ancient forests have become highways carrying modern commerce, but the essential human qualities of resilience, creativity, and community that sustained earlier generations continue to provide the foundation for whatever future this remarkable nation will create for itself and its people.